Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Now, I am going to move to the next in the conventional system. I have got the same solution also on the PPT slide for you guys. Solution is also very clearly visible on the PPT slide. Now, I am going to the next illustration out here. In this, you see APC has 2 production departments X and Y and 3 service departments, timekeeping, stores and maintenance. Departmental distribution summary showed the following expenses. Now, here you will have to get into what is called as primary distribution and the secondary distribution. Simple, you see that number of employees are there in maintenance, are there in timekeeping and so on, and stores requisition, number of stores requisition is there in production department as well as is there in maintenance department also. So, service department is also consuming some overhead. Service department is also consuming some overhead. So, what we will do is we will first allocate all the overheads to the production and service department, reallocate the overheads of the service departments to the production overhead. So, primary and secondary is what we will work on in this particular method, and that is what we call it as the step method out there. We will follow this particular step method out there in this particular case. We will go ahead with this illustration or with this solution also out here. So, again we go back to the Excel sheet and then we do it in the what you call it as the illustration 2 part of it, and when we do the illustration 2 part of it, we will do what is called as we will start entering the data out here. I am going to say service department, then we will say cost summary, and then I will say basis, and I am going to start with what you call it as step 1, 2, 3 and 4 out there. What is the step 1, 2, 3 and 4? We will just watch it out here. Conventional system, out here. Now, let me do all this in the form of what do you call it as wrapping the text out there. Let me wrap the text. Having said this, now let us sort of look at out here. First and foremost, which service department will I pick up? I am going to pick up timekeeping as a service department, because this department is going to impact all production center, store center, maintenance center, everything, and the allocation is always based on what is called as number of employees. So, I am going to pick up timekeeping out there as the first department out here in this particular case out here. Now, what is the kind of cost summary of the timekeeping department? $2,000 is the cost summary of the timekeeping department out there. What is the basis? The basis is going to be number of employees. Basis is going to be number of employees, and what are the number of employees out here? The number of employees I am going to have is in the basis of 20 in the production center, 15 in the next production center, 10 in the store center, and then what is called as 5 in the maintenance center. Please note, this is what I have: 20 in the production center X, 15 in the production center Y, 10 in the store center and 5 in the maintenance center. I am going to ignore this 8 because the cost of these 8 people in the timekeeping department is going to be borne by the other 4, that is the 2 service departments and the production department out there. That is the 2 production departments and the what do you call it as the 2 production departments and what do you call it as the other in this particular case the other 2 service departments out there. So, this is the cost summary and this is what I have to allocate. So, what happens is when I am allocating out here, now I will say step 1 in this particular case is I am just going to allocate it out there. So, let me write down the other service departments out there. The other service department is stores, next service department is stores out there, as we can see out there, and the third service department I am going to write about is maintenance service department, and then I will have production department X, and then I will have production department Y. I will have production department X and production department Y out there, and each has a cost already. The stores department has a cost of about 2500, the maintenance department has a cost of 1500, the production department X has a cost of about 12,000, the production department Y has a cost of about 8,000 in this case. I am just going to center all these numbers so that it is easier. Now, let us look at out here in this particular case. Now, let us look at in this particular case out there. Let us look at the allocation out there. This $2,000 will have to be allocated in among to these 4 out there. On what basis? On this basis 20, 15, 10, 5 out there. Now, let us say 20 out here. Now, I am talking about production department X. So, I am talking about production department X out there, and what is the kind of allocation? This is the number that is to be allocated. What is the number out here? 20 divided by 20 plus 15 is 35, 35 plus 10 is 45, 45 plus 10 is 5 is 50. So, divided by 50. So, $800 out of this 2000 goes to production department X. Now, I will talk about production department Y, the same $2,000 out there that is to be allocated, and this is 15 divided by 50 out there, and this is what 600 is gone here. And let us look at what do you call it as the stores, the next out here. So, stores next out here, it is the same 2000 into 10 divided by 50 out here, and it is gone. I am sorry, I am just doing it in the wrong column. I should have ideally done it in the this column out there. And let me look at step 1, and I am going to look at what do you call it as the maintenance department, that is going to be 2000 into 5 divided by 50 out there, and that is what is allocated out there. Now, in this particular case, so this is gone. So, this $2,000 is allocated among all this. Next, I go towards allocating the stores cost out there. What is the stores cost? The total stores is stores had $2,500 of expenditure, and another $400 has been allocated to it. So, what happens? Now, I have to allocate 2,500 plus 400. So, $2,900 is what I have to allocate among these 3 departments out there, among these 3 maintenance, production X and Y out there. Now, stores department, what is the basis? Number of stores requisitions out there, number of stores requisition, which is on the basis of what do you call it as 12 is to 10 is to 3, that is all that is going to be the basis out here, and that is what we are basically going to use in this particular case out there. So, these numbers again I am just going to center it up. Now, let us move to this. Now, what is the amount that I have to allocate? The amount that I have to allocate is 2,900. So, let us start with production department X itself. The amount that I have to allocate is how much? That is, the amount that I have to allocate is this plus this is the amount that I have to allocate out here, and that is to be multiplied by what? 12 out here, and divided by how much? 12 plus 10 22, 22 plus 3 is 25 out here, and that is what is to be allocated out there. 1392 is the amount that is allocated to production department X. Production department Y, the same way, if you look at in this particular case out here, what is the amount to be allocated? 2500 plus 400 out there into what is called as 10, and then divided by what is called as 25 out there, and that is the amount that I have to allocate out here. What is the amount that is to be allocated to production department C? It is very clear, we can just do it this way, minus this minus this, the entire remaining cost, because it is only 3, it will go to the maintenance department. Now, as step 2 is done, now I will go to step 3 in the process of. So, what happens? Timekeeping department, all the cost is allocated. Stores department, all the cost is allocated. Now, I will have the maintenance department. Maintenance department, what is the cost? Maintenance department cost now is, in this particular case, maintenance department cost is 1500 plus 200 that is allocated from the timekeeping department plus 348 that is allocated from the stores department out there. The entire thing will have to be allocated. On what basis? Now, I will say maintenance, machine hours in this particular case, machine hours out there, because maintenance is related to machine hours. What is the machine hour? 1200 is for X and 800 is for Y out there. So, that is basically is to 4 is to 3, I mean basically 4 2s are 8, 4 3s are 12, that is 3 is to 2 out there in this particular case, 3 divided by, I would say 5 out here in this particular case out there, and that is exactly what we have got out here. How did you do it? This is based on the machine hours, and that is in the ratio of 12 is to 8, that is 3 is to 2 out there, and that is what we talk about in this particular case out here is nothing but 3 is to 2. So, one can do it the same way. This is the cost of maintenance, this is what is allocated from the timekeeping, this is what is allocated from the stores out there. The entire thing will have to be allocated out there into 2 divided by, I am sorry, into 2 divided by what do you call it as 5 out there. I just have to increase one parenthesis out here in this particular case, that is all. So, now what happens? Now, I want to know step 4, what is the total cost of the production department? Total cost of the production department X is add all these costs that are allocated to it. This is the total cost of the production department X, and this is the total cost of the production department Y out here, and this is what is the total cost of production department Y, and these are the 2 basic costs that we have. And you can actually total, if you want to check, you can just total these 2 and check out there to re-verify whether we have included all the cost out here, and it is 26,000, and you can actually see on the in your problem also the total is basically 26,000. So, all the cost is allocated between production department X and production department Y. So, the total cost of production department X is 15,421, total cost of production department Y is 10,579.2 out there. I mean I can just knock off the decimals out here. Now, per unit cost, you divide by the number of units production department X is manufacturing, divide by the number of units production department Y is manufacturing, you are done with it out there. So, what happens? Conventional system were adapting it this way out there. The conventional system were basically looking at allocation in this format out there. I have got the solution also next. Now, there is one more, what do you call it as reciprocal method. I am not even covering that in this particular as part of the course, but I am going to mention in the reciprocal method out there, reciprocal service department, the service department, then etc. out there. We can include, we can do even what is called as the reciprocal approach out there, or reciprocal method, which I am not even covering in this particular case, where all the service departments render service to each other along with the production departments, like what you see out here. And you can even use what is called as a simultaneous equation, or use what is called as a solver in your Excel tool out there to solve it out there. You can use a simultaneous equation, you can use a solver to solve all this. That is also one of the methods which are there. I am not going to cover that particular aspect for you, because that will be going a little too deeper into it. At this stage, this knowledge is sufficient out there. Now, having said this, we move to the next level. Based on this, what happens? We establish a predetermined rate out there. Now, we saw in this particular case out here, we see this. Now, what happens in this particular case? There is we can work out some basic ratio out there in this based on this Excel out there. Now, I will let us look at in this particular case. Normally, what happens? About 50% of the store's expenditure are absorbed by production department A. Supposing I say that if 50% of the cost is absorbed by production department A. Or now let us say that about what do you call it as some percentage is absorbed by it. So, what happens? I am based on 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 trials out there, or based on some period of observation out there, I create a predetermined rate. So, every time I may not go back and calculate movement stores expenditure is so much, I will say 50% of it allocated to product A. So, what happens? I establish what is called as a predetermined rate out there based on these kind of these conditions out there. That is, it is calculated for each production center's overhead by dividing whatever we get, and some companies use it for plant wide overhead rates and divide, and then instead of by production center out there, and actual monthly rates affected by conditions are peculiar to the month. The problem with this is many of these expenditures predetermined rates, when we apply, sometimes it can go wrong. Why it can go wrong? Because sometimes the actual rates can be affected by the conditions in that month out. For example, I will say my cleaning staff overhead, like I said, I use the cleaning material out there. Now it's a monsoon season, so my cleaning staff requirement will be very high to keep the shop floor neat and clean out there. It is it's a very dry climate, may not be the cleaning staff requirement may not be that high, or what do you call it as the cleaning agents may not be of that use out there. So, what happens? It varies. It can vary with the month out. So, what happens? Normally these things are calculated once a year, is less effort than going through calculations every month. So, once a year you basically calculate it and establish the predetermined rates and then go ahead, but this has its own drawbacks. So, we move to what is called as if it moves in, then this can also lead to what is called as over or under absorption of overheads. For example, let us say, let me take this example itself out here, We talked about the apportionment of the store's overhead on the basis of the value of the store's requisitioned out. Now, it may so happen that department A has done only one requisition, department B and C has done multiple requisitions out there, and the cost in the stores is related to the number of requisitions that is made, but unfortunately I am allocating it on the basis of value of requisitions out there. So, what is happening? I am over absorbing for production department A, overcharging for production department A, undercharging for production department B and C out. So, what is called as that can lead to what we call it as typically over or under absorption of overheads out there. Amount absorbed by a product, actual cost of overheads etc. over absorbed or under absorbed out there. If over absorbed, then you can credit the balance in the overhead to the clearing account and so on and so forth. There are processes for that. Let me not even go into this slide out. To overcome that over or under absorption, what are we moving into? We will sort of move into the next stage of allocation, that is what we call it as the activity based costing allocation out there. As of now, the types of allocation basis on the basis of number of personnel, units really handled, security and the square feet, accounting will be staff hours, cafeteria will be number of employees, power will be kilowatt hours. One of these is the typical basis of allocation in the conventional system out there. And the criteria for allocation, simplicity, you look at the available space and equipment and so on and so forth. This slide is pretty self-explanatory in the cases out. Then there are interdepartmental services that can happen, that can also be allocated and so on and so forth out. Now, that can all these can lead to what we call it as over or under absorption. So, now what is the solution? Solution is move to activity based costing, ABC. What is ABC? Here costs are traced and allocated based on the various activities. That is, what are we looking at? We are looking at this a little more relatively much more accurate method of allocation out there. That is, we use, as I said, we use the activities done as the cost object rather than the departments. What is the activity? We identify the activity, we do not say stores department. Now, what I say? Activity, number of requisitions is the activity, that is what I will take. I will not take stores department as the cost out there. I am looking at the activity. Value of the stores requisition, that is the activity, I look at the activity out, and then I can use multiple cost drivers rather than just one and then apply out there. Little more scientific method out there. It avoids cross subsidization, it can reduce the over or under absorption of what is called as overheads out there. Now, I have just taken the example, this is again from a textbook. from a textbook, as you can see the copyright out here, it is from a textbook out there. Now, it is from a textbook of John Wiley, and as you can see out there. Now, what is activity based costing do? It takes this, that is manufacturing overheads out there, MOH. It takes this manufacturing overhead, divides it into 4 or 5 different pools out there. As you can see, one is moving and sorting the ingredients, second is cooking, third is quality control, fourth is cleaning and maintenance. It divides it into various pools. That is, it divides each activity cost pool is assigned to a cost driver. That is what the overheads are assigned basically to the activity pool. Then further, what happens? These activity pools will identify the cost drivers out there. For example, when I say cooking, the number of machine hours; when I say quality, the number of inspections; when I clean, I will say cleaning or maintenance hours, and so on. This I go a step further in identifying the activity out. I have also taken an example out there in this particular case, that is, it can use multiple cost pool, multiple cost drivers out there to take care of this particular allocation out there.